At 1:42 in the morning on March 1st, 1910, a slab of wet snow 14 feet deep, a quarter-mile wide, half a mile long, broke free from a ridge 2,000 feet above a Washington State Railroad station and came down the mountain in under a minute. It hit two trains sitting on a narrow shelf blasted into the side of the Cascades, carrying 110 people who'd been trapped there for 9 days. And it drove both trains straight off the mountain into the canyon 150 feet below. 96 people died. It remains the deadliest avalanche in recorded United States history. The man who'd built the railroad that put those trains on that mountainside was 72 years old. His name was James J. Hill, and he'd spent 30 years building the Great Northern Railway, 1,700 miles across the northern United States, without a dollar of federal land grants, on private capital, and the conviction that wherever a railroad went, civilization followed. He was told what the mountain had done before the snow even finished moving. He grieved, and then he ordered the work to continue. That single decision tells you almost everything about what came next. An 8-mile tunnel driven straight through solid granite, built to make sure nothing like Wellington could ever happen again. And what it actually cost. Not in the $25 million it took to build, but in the years, the injuries, and the names that never made it into any history book. To understand why anyone would attempt this, you need to understand what the Cascades meant to Washington's economy. West of the range, mild, wet timber ports. East, dry wheat cattle mines. Each half needed the other, and a railroad connecting them had no real choice but to cross the mountains. Mountains where snowfall is measured in feet per week. Ridge winds exceed 100 miles an hour, and the avalanche terrain is among the most active on the continent. Hill's survey engineer John Stevens spent the winter of 1889 camped on a ridge taking elevation readings in conditions that killed an average of 2 pack mules a day from exposure, and found a pass at just over 4,000 feet, not the easiest crossing available, but the best one a locomotive could actually climb. Even so, the western approach dropped over 2,000 feet in less than 8 miles, too steep for any straight route within a workable grade. Stevens' solution was a switchback, trains climbing in a zigzag of reversing dead-end tracks, gaining elevation in stages. It worked, but it was slow, complicated, and sat directly in the heaviest avalanche terrain in the Pacific Northwest, needing rotary plows deployed every single winter, with no guarantee those plows wouldn't get buried themselves before they could clear a path. In 1897, Hill authorized a tunnel beneath the summit to eliminate the worst of the switchback grades. That first Cascade tunnel, 2.5 miles long, opened in 1900, but it didn't eliminate the exposed shelf line further west, above the canyon, on the approach to a station called Wellington. Wellington wasn't really a town. It was a cookhouse, a water tank, a bunkhouse, and track, sitting on a ledge surrounded by terrain that shed enormous volumes of snow in every major storm. The winter of 1909 into 1910 built a deep, dry snowpack through January. Then in late February, a warm, wet system moved in, and rain fell directly onto that cold powder, creating exactly the layered instability avalanche forecasters today would call maximally dangerous. No railroad had avalanche forecasters in 1910. A passenger train and a mail train, moving up the western slope, got stopped by a slide, then trapped between more slides ahead and behind. Every rotary plow the railroad sent was blocked or buried before it reached them. For 9 days, 110 people sat at Wellington on rationed supplies, cut off, watching slides come down around them on both sides, until a warm evening on February 28th brought rain and lightning straight onto the saturated slush layer sitting above the station. Just before 2 in the morning, the mountain let go. Survivors who'd been in the uphill buildings began digging within minutes, by lantern light, by feel in the dark, pulling people from the wreckage by following their voices through the snow. It took days to recover the dead. Some bodies weren't found until the snow melted that spring. If a story like this is worth your time, subscribing helps make sure more of them find their way to you. Hill's public response was immediate. Relief funds, a statement, support for the families of the identified dead. Privately, he began the process that would end, years later, with an entirely new tunnel. The station's name was quietly changed from Wellington to Thai in 1913, hoping to separate the place from the disaster it had become synonymous with. But wooden snowsheds, however extensively built, couldn't change the fundamental problem. exposed track on the most active avalanche terrain in the region. The only real fix was putting the railroad entirely inside the mountain, not for 2.5 miles, but for 7.79 miles, all the way through to where the dangerous terrain finally ended. Hill died in 1916. His son authorized the new survey in 1918, confirming the tunnel was buildable for roughly $25 million. Through granite with up to 1,500 feet of rock overhead, requiring ventilation for nearly 8 miles of enclosed bore and housing several thousand workers in the Cascades for 4 years straight. Construction began in 1925. The workforce came from the same labor pools that had built America's major infrastructure since the 1860s: Scandinavian timber workers, Balkan and Italian hard rock miners, Irish laborers following railroad work for generations, and black workers from the American South hired under explicitly separate and worse conditions than white workers doing identical jobs, a wage gap recorded in payroll ledgers without comment. Common laborers earned $350 to $450 a day in 1926, $60 to $75 in today's money for work that no modern safety code would allow. Camps at both portals housed up to 1,200 men, snowbound through winter, entirely dependent on supply trains the weather regularly cut off. Inside the tunnel, the work ran on a cycle hard rock miners called drill, blast, muck. A crew advanced a wheeled drilling platform to the rock face and bored 60 to 80, holes in a precise geometric pattern across a face 24 feet wide and 22 feet high, a full shift of continuous drilling. Faulted, wet, or shattered rock demanded slower rates and immediate timber bracing to prevent collapse before concrete lining could go in. Groundwater under pressure could halt progress entirely. Each hole was loaded with calculated dynamite charges fired in a precise sequence. Center holes first, opening a void surrounding holes breaking outward toward it. Perimeter holes last, shaping the final tunnel wall, the whole sequence lasting under a second, with explosive weight per blast running into hundreds of pounds. After the blast, crews waited for gas to clear. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes longer in poorly ventilated headings, men coming back too soon with headaches and nausea from nitrogen oxides. Then came mucking, shoveling hundreds of tons of broken rock by hand into rail cars, clearing the face for the next drilling shift. On a good day in solid rock, a heading advanced 8 to 10 feet. On a bad day, 2 feet or nothing at all, driven simultaneously from both ends, plus additional side tunnels punched in from the surface. 8 separate crews worked at once deep inside the mountain, each barely aware of the other's progress, except through daily survey logs. Keeping all of them aligned to meet as a single usable tunnel was its own engineering feat, carried out with optical instruments and the same basic surveying methods used since the Erie Canal a century earlier. When the 2 main headings finally met in the center of the mountain, after nearly 4 miles of drilling in the dark from each direction, the horizontal misalignment was 1.5 inches. Rockfalls were the leading cause of death. A loose block separating from the roof often sounds identical to ordinary rock settling, and scaling crews worked with long steel bars after every blast, listening for the different note a bar makes against loose stone versus solid rock, knocking down what they could reach and hoping the timber sets held what they couldn't. Estimates place total worker deaths during construction between 15 and 32, depending on how off-site fatalities are counted. And that number doesn't include the men who developed silicosis years later, from crystalline silica dust thrown off every drill bit striking granite, a disease that progressed silently over decades and was never systematically connected back to the Cascade Tunnel payroll records at all. The tunnel was completed in December 1928. The first revenue train ran through on January 12, 1929, at 7.79 miles, the longest railroad tunnel in the Western Hemisphere at the time. The Wellington Shelf, where 96 people had died, was abandoned entirely, its grade quietly removed. Because no steam locomotive could survive an 8-mile transit without asphyxiating its crew, the Great Northern electrified the entire tunnel and its approaches, full overhead catenary, substations, the works, built in parallel with the boring itself. The tunnel remains in continuous use today. BNSF Railway, the Great Northern's successor, runs roughly 30 trains a day through it, still the longest railroad tunnel in North America, nearly a century later. Diesel-electric locomotives eventually replaced the original electrification, though ventilation fans at the portals still clear the bore between trains. Drive Highway 2 near Stevens Pass today. and you can stand at either portal and watch a loaded train disappear into the dark granite that crews drilled and blasted. Shift after shift from 1925 to 1928, the concrete lining giving way, 50 feet inside to the same rock those men fought through at wages of $3.50 a day, temperatures over 90 degrees at the working face, and conditions that some of them wouldn't understand the true cost of for another 20 years. The Wellington site itself isn't marked for passing drivers. From the road, it just looks like a stretch of steep avalanche slope above a valley, which is exactly what it is, and exactly what it was in February of 1910. The names of the 96 dead are recorded in King County's death records, and many appear on a memorial along the Iron Goat Trail, which now follows the original railroad grade past the concrete remains of the old snow sheds. The men who built the tunnel that replaced that shelf have no memorial at all. Their names exist only in payroll ledgers, incident reports, and scattered county death records, most never connected to the project they died building. The tunnel is still down there, a mile and a half beneath the pass, running trains through the dark exactly the way it has for nearly 100 years. The mountain is still there. The tunnel is still inside it. That's what remains.